Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. And I wanted to use the few minutes that we allocate to my talk this morning to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what has happened with green building in Canada the last 15 years, mainly driven by, or to a large extent, by the Canada Green Building Council, which is really an organizational coalition of industry leaders in Canada that advancing green building practices in a very holistic way, energy, water, materials, across Canada. And it's been, over the last 10 years, just like in the south of the border in the US and other green building councils around the world, it has worked quite successfully. Because in Canada, we do not have the regulations and the legislative frameworks that would support very rapid and very directed action towards reducing carbon emissions and the impacts of climate change. But there are a number of drivers that really still driving green building ahead in Canada. One is obviously environmental. We are a Nordic country. We are a huge country. But we feel the impacts of climate change probably more than other countries. The Arctic is becoming ice-free. This is British Columbia. I'm from Vancouver. This is the pine forest in British Columbia. And the pine forest in British Columbia, which is the size about of Greece, is dying and will be dead within the next 5 to 10 years, 80% of it, because of a beetle that is no longer dying because the temperature is not getting low enough anymore. This obviously has a huge economic and a huge environmental impact on our economy. The other drivers, of course, is the recognition, which we have a number of years ago, is that buildings, the built environment and buildings just contribute such a huge amount of carbon to the atmosphere, be it during operation of buildings or during the construction or the extraction and construction of construction materials. But the third part, and that really speaks again to the kind of more market-based, voluntary initiatives and actions you're seeing in North America and Canada, is the rating system. Here, I guess in the UK you have BREEAM, in Australia you have Green Star, in Japan you have CASB. In North America, and here also in Europe increasingly, what's been a very distinguishing factor for us is LEED. And you might ask, why is LEED such a driver? Essentially, what LEED has done is, it has set, and we as an organization, we have used LEED as a voluntary standard to drive innovation in the building industry. And when we first arrived with LEED in Canada about 10 plus years ago, so in the early 2000s, industry was basically saying, we can't do this is moving way too fast. And we were saying, participate because this has legs. And it has moved very, very quickly. And it essentially has replaced, for a large part, regulation. So municipalities, provincial governments, and even federal government referring to LEED as a standard to follow because the regulations and the development regulations is moving too slowly to innovate or to have a significant impact in reducing environmental impacts from buildings. The results are everywhere. We currently have LEED standards for pretty much every building type, from new buildings to existing buildings to homes and for communities. So you see projects across the country of any size, both in cities and in rural areas, in the Arctic, as well as in the warmer parts of Canada, which are not very many, being built to the LEED rating system. This is occupied by one of our major banks, the Royal Bank of Canada. It's been built in Toronto. This is kind of the standard now for new office construction in Canada across the country. This is a utility in Winnipeg, in Manitoba, which is kind of in the center of the country. Again, a very innovative building. This is the headquarters. It's a provincially owned utility. Where the first one was a business decision to build this building. This is one to make a statement. There's a utility, you need to be highly efficient because any kilowatt hour that Manitoba Hydro saves, they can sell south of the border to the United States at a way higher price. But this is an environment when in the summer it's plus 40 degrees, in the winter it's minus 40 degrees. This is a building that's on a geothermal system, is naturally ventilated, and has a very low kilowatt hours per square meter performance, which I'll show you a little bit later in my presentation. This is Vancouver, where I live. This is the Vancouver Convention Center, one of the considered to be the greenest convention center, certainly in North America, maybe the world. It's a large green roof, has an artificial reef underneath it, takes the cooling out of the ocean, located right on the Pacific Ocean, built with a lot of wood inside, and so it treats its own wastewater. And these are all technologies and products, innovation that's really been adopted pretty much voluntarily without much pressure from government on the private sector to deliver these types of facilities. But it's not just about new buildings. When you look at the LEED rating system and the uptake of it, the column on the very left, this is the new construction. So we have over about 32, 33 million square meters of buildings in the pipeline. In the middle, this is the existing building stock. Where the left column has grown over the last 10 years, the one in the middle has grown over the last 3 years. So the existing building side is really taking off, large existing buildings being retrofitted to very high environmental standards. And I explain to you in a minute why is this happening and how. So about 15 million square meters currently. These are, again, large towers, either for telecommunications firms like TELUS here on the left, or the TD Center. This is a 40-year-old, this is right in the financial district in Canada, in Toronto. These are a number of buildings that were designed by Mies van der Rohe 40 years ago. They're all being retrofitted to very high levels of energy and water performance under the LEED for existing buildings, operations, and maintenance system, occupied by the Toronto Dominion Bank, one of our largest banks in Canada. I couldn't leave, when we started the council, and we had 3 staff, I couldn't never imagine that it would be one day the case. We were hoping for it, but we would not know that banks and large commercial real estate interests in Canada and other landowners and real estate owners would see this as a way to show corporate social responsibility as well as being very good to their pocketbook. So the terminology when it comes around green buildings in Canada has really, particularly over the last 3-4 years, has really changed quite a bit. And kind of one word here in the middle is market-based solutions, and a market-based approach that's supported by good government policy, but by a lot of good private sector practices of investment and good return on investment, of rating, both having rigor and stringency to make sure that the desired results are achieved, that the buildings are managed in a way to maintain and realize the benefit of the assets over its lifetime. But there are also considerations like I said, corporate social responsibility, branding. LEED in North America is very popular as a brand that they can report back to their shareholders. So this is kind of terminology that we are using, and clearly say the word regulation is not part of this, the terminology in Canada at this point at all. Yet the market uptake is, when you look at this diagram, is about 40% of the uptake is driven by commercial interest, and about a third is institutional, about a third is government-owned buildings that are meeting high environmental building standards. And then you have large real estate firms, and that, I think that speaks to the corporate social responsibility and actually how these firms, who they're speaking to, and how they secure their funds to build these buildings. This is Oxford Properties, one of our largest commercial landlords, and this is the annual report from last year. So just on the bottom here, what they had, and this is their CEO, highlighting that they had the first platinum building, office building in Canada that they're renting to their tenants. they have reduced their greenhouse gas emissions by 28% over the last 5 years, or since 2005 actually, last 7 years. And 95% of their tenants want them to be sustainable. So these are all important. This is market-driven considerations because they get the money from pension funds. The pension funds want them to invest. These are pension funds from teachers, from government employees. They don't want them to invest that money into buildings that are meet high performance, are considered to be green buildings because they yield good returns on investments. These types of buildings right now, in a new office tower, cost about 2% more to construct to elite gold, a bit more to platinum level, but about 2% to elite gold level. And the internal rates of return are about 14 to 15% for these companies. So it's a very clear and very good financial decisions why they would build those buildings, attract tenants, have full occupancy, higher occupancy than other buildings, and then also do good for the environment and do good for pension fund holders and generate good returns. And the green buildings and financial performance, there are more and more studies coming out. And, take those percentages with a little bit of a grain of salt. It really depends how these studies are set up. But the more and more studies coming out, they all show very positive indicators on buildings that are green. I'm not just talking about LEED. It could be BREEAM or Green Star in Australia and so on, and around rents, around sales price, around occupancy, about lease rates, about operating savings. The business case is becoming very clear. The business case was always just about how much more does it cost initially to build a green building. We know it's doable now, costs a little bit more, but the benefits, in particular the higher performance you get, the benefits are quite significant. And these are the tenants. These are the tenants in these buildings. These are banks, these are lawyers, these are large retailers, and so on. We have a retailer now in Canada called Target that's retrofitting 124 stores to the LEED rating system because they want to attract their customers to be a good corporate citizen and attract customers to their stores. But the other banks, driven by corporate social responsibility. But it also results in good performance. And the performance are, in Canada, our existing buildings, so we can't be very proud about our performance. Granted, we have a cold climate. The winters in Canada are long and nasty. And we use a lot of energy, and the buildings are very inefficient. So you can see in a column 350 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. That's kind of the average office building in Canada, normalized for weather. If you do a LEED building, we cut this in half, 50%. But some of the leading buildings that you can see on the bottom, they will be getting down to about 50, 60, 80, 90 kilowatt hours per square meter per year on a voluntary basis. So these are the leading buildings. And they actually, this kind of the 162, that shows actually the people that develop codes and how they can now drive the codes even further, raise the codes further, because it has been, the industry shows that this is possible within a price point that 2% is actually more of a contingency than a serious additional capital cost in a project. The occupancy of buildings is not just the performance, but also the human aspect of it. There are more studies coming out, and there was a recent study also too from the World Green Building Council on the business case that talks about the human aspect of green buildings is. And this was a long 3-year study, cost $1 million, that showed that, and I'm not going to read it out because it's kind of self-explanatory, that green buildings consistently rated very, very high on well-being. And what I really liked at the end is the people, they experience better sleep quality and positive feelings after a whole long day of work. And if you're an employer and you get a little bit more productivity out of your employees, these are big numbers. But there's also the green economy, and this is about jobs. So this is the other aspect of it. One is obviously goes to the building owner. This goes to the society as a whole. And not enough studies yet in Canada, but this is one that was done by the Globe Foundation the second time around. This is just British Columbia. Do you understand? British Columbia is on the west coast. We have about 6 million people. 65% of those people live in Vancouver region, Victoria. The rest is dispersed to this huge province. So I would assume that most of the jobs are actually within the kind of the urban areas, because that's where most of the construction is really taking place. But the contribution of GDP of the green building sector is significant now, exceeding $5 billion every year, just in British Columbia. And then also employment. Over the last 2 years, it went from about 30,000 people that had been direct employed in the green building industry to about 45,000 full-time employees in British Columbia. So you can see that the business case for green buildings and the benefits, both from an investment perspective and from a harnessing, in a way, the power of business, supported by good government policy. And I should say that in Canada, all the major cities, all the provincial governments, and the federal government, they have very strong green building policies for their own buildings. They have adopted them very early, they're maintaining them, and they have shown some really good results. And certainly when green building started, they have put a stake in the ground and said, we need to do this because we want to be walking the talk. That had initially sent a very positive signal to the market, because first to the designers, to the engineers, the designers, and the contractors, because it meant work. It meant a job in that sector, and became very competitive. And these are our members. These were our early members, the engineers and the architects and the contractors that built those buildings were our members that really then became ambassadors, because they said, this is an opportunity. We're getting in here at the ground floor, building up this industry that has a lot of potential and has really shown over the last year that they were right. It then moved on to the private sector, and the private sector now it has shifted over, that the private sector now, where they want to go, they're actually leading government right now in Canada and saying, they're actually going to government and saying, we want more. We want to move towards low carbon. We see that as the next opportunity. We want to move towards healthy buildings. We want to move towards regeneration. I just want to show you 2 more slides and then go on to the next speaker, which is really, we have gone down that climate change discussion so far that we thought, sustainability was the end point. Considering all the environmental indicators globally, just being not good and not bad anymore, just sustainable, is probably not good enough. As McDonough, a very famous actor in North America, once said, he said, if somebody asked you about your marriage and how it is, and you said it's sustainable, then doesn't mean it's not very good. And I think he had a point. He said that several years ago. So I think it's really about regeneration, not meaning that we regenerate. I think the planet has an incredible ability to regenerate itself. We just need to give it the opportunity. And what we see emerging as a new paradigm in Canada and in North America is really a thing about regenerative design. So a restorative kind of architecture, sort of thinking about buildings and communities. How can buildings and communities give back, actually make it bigger, rehabilitate in a way the natural environment, not just carbon, but zero water, zero waste, and so on. So this is all on the agenda. We don't yet know what it means, but there's a tool now. It's called the Living Building Challenge, and I saw there's something on the program here today in the afternoon I'll be listening to. It comes from the west coast of the United States. We have some living buildings in Canada now, in the Vancouver area, and it's just on the scale. This slide alone, you could have about an hour discussion what it means. But I think we need to move away from a negative environmental impact to a positive and a restorative environmental impact over the next 20, 30 years. Sustainability alone, I don't think that's, I think that has passed. So I want to leave you with that thought. And again, this is a new area of innovation, innovation technology, in products, in design. And I think this is a very positive development for any economy in any country. And we're starting to see it unfold now. So thank you very much for your time.